So I'm going to focus on Andrews Wood, New England Wood, Ladies Wood, and South Efford Marsh. So I'm going to start with Andrews Wood. So Andrews Wood, as you probably know if you live in the South Hams, is near Loddeswell. It's a fantastic site. About 2/3 of it is woodland, and about 1/3 of the site is actually a species-rich grassland. So this area here, and up here, all really nice grassland areas. It used to be called Stanton Moor after the village of Stanton, and there is actually an old medieval farmstead in the wood around to this point here. This was abandoned. The previous owners had a son called Andrew, who unfortunately was killed in a car accident, and they gifted the site to the Wildlife Trust on provision that we rename the site Andrews Wood. So we've had the site since 1987. I'll move to the next slide. So as I said before, most of the site is woodland. It's secondary woodland, so it's abandoned farmland, and the oldest trees, the veteran trees, we've got this lovely old oak tree here, are on the old hedge banks. So it's divided into lots of different field compartments, and as they got abandoned, the trees just grew up. So you've got some fantastic veteran trees on the hedge banks with lots of lichens and ferns and mosses. We've also got younger secondary woodland that's maybe 40, 50 years old. Lots of birch and willow and alder, and some open glades. So the woodland, we do a bit of woodland management. Most of the management really is in the grassland areas. So you've got these very rich, similar to sort of Ross pasture, very wet, damp, botanically rich grassland areas. So it's just an overview of these areas. So this yellow plant here is called yellow Bartsia, and this is semi-parasitic on grasses. So it's very similar to yellow rattle in that respect, and it helps to reduce the density of the grasses, which helps us in the conservation of these sites. And here we've got lots of ragged robin, obviously a foxglove there. We've also got common sorrel, lesser spearwort. So very, very rich grasslands. Here we've got southern marsh orchids. We also get heath spotted orchids and common spotted orchids, and they all hybridise, which makes it quite difficult to identify them sometimes. But if you go down to Andrews Wood in May, June time, there's lots and lots of these orchids in the top field. Again, you get meadow sweet and purple loosestrife in these wet areas. So it's really very colourful. The sort of star of the show really at Andrews Wood is actually this plant called the heath lobelia, and it's only found in 6 places in the UK. And the other places are in Cornwall and Dorset and Hampshire, I think, and a few other sites in Devon. But it's a pioneer species, which means it needs bare ground and disturbance. So we have to do some specific management just for this plant, just to make sure the populations stay reasonably high. But that flowers in sort of late July, August time, and we get quite a few people coming down just to see the heath lobelia. Another rare thing is this lichen here, which is called the golden eye lichen. So it's this yellow one here. This is another type of lichen I can't remember the name of, but the golden eye lichen was found in 2013 by Barbara Benfield, a lichenologist, and she found it on this one willow tree here, and this is in Cuckoofield. So it was just on this one tree here, so we have to make sure that gets protected. But it was thought to be extinct actually in the UK, and then she found it again, so that's all very good. And just again, it's just giving you a flavour of what we find. So where you get a diversity of plants, you also get a diversity of invertebrates. So you've got an orange tip butterfly here, and the caterpillars feed on cuckoo flowers and garlic mustard, of which we've got a lot at Andrews Wood. Brimstone butterfly. And brimstone butterflies apparently like to nectar on purple flowers, of which also we've got a lot at Andrews Wood. So we've got a common carder bee. This is the bee fly, which is actually a species of fly, but obviously mimics a bee. I must say as well, a lot of these photographs are taken by Jeff Fole, who's one of our regular volunteers at Andrews Wood. And we've got various species of horsefly. So these are the bane of my life in the summer. Obviously, as you probably know, well, it's actually just the females that bite, and they need a meal of blood before they mate. But the males mostly feed on nectar, and actually they're because of that, they're actually a good pollinator. So you maybe don't think of horseflies as being beneficial in that respect. The bottom picture is a picture of a sawfly, and it's called a sawfly because its ovipositor here has this serrated edge, and it drills a hole into the leaves and then lays its eggs in the hole. But there's lots of different species of sawfly. We have the fleabane tortoise beetle, and as the name suggests, it spends all of its life on the fleabane, common fleabane flowers here. So when it's a larvae, it's green, and it has this is called a fecal shield, and it carries this with it, I presume, for some sort of protection, either some sort of camouflage, or it just maybe doesn't taste very nice for predators. And then when they're adult, they turn into these orange beetles here. But the fleabane is covered in these beetles in summer. Another picture here. This is a frosted orange moth caterpillar, and it spends most of its life living within the stems of foxgloves, also some other plants. And it makes its way down the stems, and then it feeds all the way inside the stems and pupates. Yeah, so it's an interesting plant. Thick-legged flower beetle. Another, obviously it's only the males that have these thickened legs, but just to give you an idea of the array of invertebrates. Have good bird assemblages at Andrews Wood, all the sort of woodland birds you'd expect, marsh tits and blue tits, great tits, nuthatches. We also get woodcock. Quite often see them in the winter, sort of walking along, suddenly they suddenly fly up and fly off. Get lots of willow warblers. If you walk down to Andrews Wood in the summer, it's almost deafening with the willow warblers, and they tend to lay their make the nests along the edges of the scrub here in the long grass, or just in the bottom of the scrub. But yeah, there are lots of those. Lots of reptiles, lots of grass snakes, slow worms, common lizards. We don't have any adders. Apparently the last adder record was about 25, 30 years ago. So unfortunately we don't have adders anymore. But because of all these different habitats, there's a very diverse array of wildlife. Andrews was very famous for its dormouse population. Tom Maddock did a lot of work putting up the first dormouse boxes and surveying the dormice for many, many years. And we've had great horseshoe bats along with other bat species recorded there. And the great horseshoe bats really like these sort of woodland edges. This is like a mature hedgerow here, and they will feed on moths and then hang upside down in the trees here to eat the moths. So they don't eat them in flight. And again here, this area of gorse could very well have dormouse nests in it. That's the ideal habitat, as well as living in the woodland. So yeah, so Hannah mentioned Lily Wheeler. So she left us a large sum of money in 2018, and we gradually spent this money over 4 different reserves over a couple of years, and it paid for various things. So it paid for some very maybe seemingly mundane but very important work, such as fencing. So a lot of our fencing was 15, 20 years old, and it was falling apart. And unfortunately, we have to have fencing because we have ponies on site, and the ponies are a really important part of the management of the site. They graze, obviously graze the grass, and they also control some of the scrub to a certain extent. So unfortunately, fencing is essential, and it's one of these things that we have to have. And it paid for about, I think, over a mile of new fencing. And also where this fencing was put in, we had to clear back the scrub, and these bare patches here are absolutely ideal for the heath lobelia and some of the other plants. It exposes the soil and allows these plants to germinate. We also have it paid for some new gates here and a catching pen for when we have to move the ponies. So the Lily Wheeler funding also paid for a new sign over on the sort of other entrance to the reserve, and this is Chris Bryant and Terry from one of the volunteer groups helped put this up, and it paid for some way markers. So it also helps, obviously it helps with conservation work, but also help to improve people's enjoyment of the site and provide some information about the site. Again, a very practical thing that it paid for was a new car park. So this is, so we've got the main car park, and this was the car park along the road to Aveton Gifford. Again, it's very useful to have this because it allows, when we have volunteer days, the volunteers can all park on here rather than trying to squeeze onto the road. And when we need to load up the ponies, we can now bring the stock trailer onto here rather than trying to load it up from the road, which is very awkward. So it all helps with helping the management of the site to be more efficient. We also planted up this bank here, created this new bank and planted that with trees. We also had a nice new bench paid for. So yeah, so we have legacies, but we also have a lot of support from our volunteer groups. So this is the Andrews Wood volunteer group here. Sorry, not everybody's in this picture, but they come out once a month throughout the year, doing various tasks. This is Jeff Fole, who took a lot of those pictures of the insects and also designed these new nest boxes made out of, this was out of a drain, old drain pipe and bits of plastic, and he's got various boxes put up over the wood. This is Mike, who's one of our pony checkers and volunteer warden. So they do an awful lot of work there. So the Lily Wheeler project, as well as paying for materials, it also paid for my time as well. So a lot of you know, obviously have a lot of volunteers, but also helps to pay for my time to carry out important conservation work and coordinate some of the volunteer work. So we spend an awful lot of time doing scrub clearing. So scrub is a really good habitat, and we know we spend a lot of time talking about scrub clearing. Scrub is actually fantastic. It's a good for dormice and birds, and it creates these microclimates, but we do also have to clear some of the scrub back, otherwise we'd lose the grassland. So it's creating this sort of balance of habitats really. So so quite a lot of gorse and bramble gets cut back periodically in the winter, and this is the effect of it. So at the bottom you've got a nice array of ragged robin and lots of other plants in here, and we would lose that if we just let all the scrub come over, and it would scrub over very quickly. So and the Lily Wheeler legacy also helped pay for a member of staff from our record centre to come out and help us do some survey work. So the monitoring of the grassland is really important, and he came out and helped to set up some random quad traps and then analyse all the data, and that means that we can quantify whether the management's working. Obviously you can look at pictures and say, yeah, that's looking better, but in future years it's good to actually have some data to prove that your management's working or not working, and then you might need to change it. So yes, and it also so we've had other bits of funding as well. We had a donation from Ferguson family, which paid for some board walking within the reserve. Anyone that's been to Andrews Wood will know it's a very, very muddy site, and so we've had quite a few 100 metres of board walking put in some of the muddy areas throughout the woodland. But as well as making it easier for people to walk around, it also helps stop the path erosion. When you get these muddy paths, people then start to sort of walk either side of the path. The paths just get wider and wider, and they erode all the plants along the edges. So if you put a nice boardwalk in, it stops that happening. You get the plants growing up either side of the boardwalk. So it does have a good almost like a conservation value as well. And we've had various donations for ponds as well at Andrews Wood. This was the latest one. John Spry was one of our pony checkers for many years at Andrews Wood, and unfortunately he died over a year and a half ago. And his wife and his Rotary Club wanted to donate some money to Andrews Wood and have something in his memory, and so the money went towards a new pond, and this was actually dug out fairly recently. It got delayed because of COVID and we had really wet weather, so I think it was September actually, so it's still quite new, but eventually wildlife will colonise this pond. We've got other ponds nearby and a big lake next door to the reserve, so there's lots of wildlife that will just naturally colonise, and we'll hopefully get insects such as broad-bodied chasers, common blue damselflies, and there's lots of frogs and toads that will use it. So hopefully that should look quite nice in a couple of years' time. So I'll just go on to Ladies Wood. So Ladies Wood is near South Brent. Yeah, so I just saw this quote earlier, and a pleasant, unpretentious little wood with a definite charm of its own. I think that's very apt for Ladies Wood. So yeah, so as I said, it's only a small site. It's about 3 or 4 hectares. This is the South Brent's over here. This is the viaduct, and then we've got Glazebrook stream here. That there's a tributary of the Avon. So it's on a north-facing slope. It was Devon Wildlife Trust's first nature reserve, and it was donated to us by H.G. Hull in 1961. And H.G. Hull was one of the founders of the Devon Wildlife Trust. It's called Ladies Wood, but originally it was called Ladies Wood, as in Ladies Wood, because in the 1800s it used to be owned by the Carew sisters, and when Ordnance Survey was first mapping the area, they asked who owned it, and someone told them they didn't know, but the locals had always referred to it as the Ladies Wood because these two sisters were always walking around there. It's actually mostly secondary woodland, so it was farmland, and you can still see all the hedge banks there when you walk around it. So it's secondary woodland that's grown up since the 1800s. It's a lovely little site. It's very well known for its bluebells in the spring, You get lots of people visiting then. You get sort of sometimes see artists coming there and painting it. It's just such a spectacular sight. So although it's sort of classed as secondary woodland, there are actually, the fact it's got bluebells and some of these other plants are more sort of indicative of a more ancient woodland with these species associated with it. So you've got wood anemone, yellow archangel, and we've got this a slightly rarer form of buttercup called the Goldilocks buttercup, and it's hairier than the other buttercups, and the petals, it looks like they've fallen off, but actually it just often just looks like that. It often has a lot of petals missing, and where you have all the petals, often they're very unequal sizes. So that's quite a nice plant. So here's a picture of, this is H.G. Hull here. So he, as I said, used to own the wood before he gave it to Devon Wildlife Trust. And the site's well known for its dormouse population. There's a nice picture of dormouse there. And he recorded the first dormice in the wood in 1956, and he found some nests, dormouse nests, in the natural nests in the trees and brambles. As you probably know, they weave nests out of honeysuckle bark, and then they cover them with leaves. These nests are usually about the size of tennis balls. And he did a lot of the pioneering work on developing the nest boxes that you see for dormice. And he put the first dormouse nest boxes up in 1962. And he did a lot of work on studying dormice and discovered what they made the nests from. So we've tried to carry on this work a bit intermittently, but certainly for the last 12 years, we've had dormouse boxes up at the wood. I think we've got about 40 now, 40 there at the moment. Janet Chapman here at the bottom has done a lot of the work checking on the dormice boxes for the last sort of 10 years or so. And actually this is Celia, who's actually checks on a lot of the bird boxes as well. I've got a good bird population there. This is Chris Bryan, and again, the Lily Wheeler project paid for, I think it was 60 dormouse and bird boxes to replace some of the ones that were getting quite worn out at Ladies Wood. So that was fantastic. And here's a picture of my colleague Andrew Warren. So he helped put up, so this is one of the new dormouse boxes going up at Ladies Wood. So that the lifespan of these boxes really is sort of maybe 5, 6 years, 7 years at most. They do start to rot after that time. So and we need to continue with the monitoring, and all the results go to the national database. And the Lily Wheeler project as well, funding also paid for a nice new sign. These are some of our Woodard volunteers, our long-term volunteers. A very wet day putting that up, quite a steamed art picture there. So again, so it's helped pay for for people's enjoyment of the site, and a nice map on there to show them where they are. So over to New England Wood. So we've gone from our first nature reserve, Ladies Wood, to one of our newest nature reserves. So New England Wood is over near Lee Mill, just off the A38, about 7 miles from Plymouth. It's 21 hectares of ancient semi-natural woodland, and we acquired this site in 2016. Go to the next slide. So, this is New England Wood here on this side, and this is the adjacent site called New England Quarry. The red boundary is actually the county wildlife site, so it's all one county wildlife site. But before we acquired the site, it had been owned by an aggregate company who also owned the quarry. And the quarrying stopped in 1994. An application was made for a change of use to landfill, and much of this woodland would have been lost in the construction of a new road and all sorts of disturbance. But fortunately, some of the local people, including Neil Tugwell, who actually owns this bit, campaigned and managed to save the site and kept it safe. And then we took over the ownership of this part of the wood and called it New England Wood. On the maps it's called Southwood Wood, but we changed it to New England Wood. Neil Tugwell's part here is actually fantastic. Obviously this bit's not open to the public, but he's done some fantastic work here, turning this into an amazing sort of conservation area as well. But obviously New England Wood is open to the public. So you've got the River Yelm running all the way through, well, not through it, adjacent to it along here, and that comes out at near Wembury. So just to give you some pictures, just to give you a bit of an overview of what the site looks like. So it's sort of ancient, it's classed as ancient semi-natural woodland. There's a lot of ash on the site, quite a lot of wet woodlands as well, sort of alder and willow dominated. And it's got various sort of little licks, as well as the river. You've got these sort of leats and streams running through it. It's very, very pretty reserve. And then in the spring, lots and lots of wild garlic. Again, fantastic array of bluebells, lots of ferns. It's a really stunning site, actually. It's just a nice picture of some candle snuff fungus here. It's got a good assemblage of birds that you'd expect from a woodland, nuthatches, kingfishers, often seen flying up and down the river, tree creepers. A more unusual bird is the lesser spotted woodpecker. So it's by far the sort of rarer woodpecker species compared to, I think there's 3,000 pairs in the UK compared to 45,000 pairs of greater spotted woodpeckers, and their lesser spotted ones are just a bit bigger than a sparrow. Also found lots of species of bat there, and there's been some invertebrate surveys. They found some very rare species of cranefly actually associated with the wet woodlands and the leats. So this is the River Yelm. It's a very shallow river, fast flowing river, and it's got these sort of areas of gravel, and these are really important spawning and nursery areas for some different species of fish. So we get brown trout, we get 3 species of lamprey, brook lamprey, river lamprey, and sea lamprey, and these are sort of quite eel-like fish. They don't have mouth parts, they have suckers, and they basically sort of feed off other fish and carrion. But the river such as this is a really important areas for the egg laying and nursery areas for these species. We've also there's been quite a lot of signs of otter down the river as well, with quite a few otter spraints found. Yeah, so very diverse site. So in terms of management, it's largely the woodland's largely non-intervention. We have done some work more recently on unfortunately there's a lot of ash on the site, and unfortunately a lot of the ash is starting to succumb to ash dieback, and we've had to take out some of the trees where they pose a safety risk, so near to the paths. But other than that, at the moment, it's largely non-intervention. Excuse me, my voice is going. But the Lily Wheeler project again helped to pay for some bridges to be built. So before these bridges, basically people just had to sort of wade across the streams here, so now we've just made it a little bit easier for people. Again, this is the South Devon and Dartmoor volunteer group who work on lots of different sites every Wednesday all over South Devon and Dartmoor. So we put in these couple of bridges, as well as making it easier for people to get around the site. It also as well stops all the bank erosion, because people were sort of walking along trying to find a way to get across, and then they erode all the plants on the edges. So a bit like the boardwalk in Andrews Wood, it keeps people walking in one place and stops the paths getting too wide. So yeah, so this group do a fantastic job. We've also had help from the Centrica volunteers who are based just up the road actually, and some of the funding went to buy some posts and rails to just put up along the entrance, alongside the road, where it used to be a sort of quite horrible little barbed wire fence. We took that down and made it look a little bit nicer. Also paid for a nice new sign, because it was a new reserve. We had no signs at all, so the Lily Wheeler money was paid for some of these signs here. So it's all been great. And then lastly, I just want to move on to South Efford Marsh. So South Efford Marsh is in Aveton Gifford. Again, it's a fairly new site. We leased this site from the Environment Agency. We've been leasing it since 2011. So Aveton Gifford is here, and it's on the River Avon, which runs along from Dartmoor and comes out at Bigbury here. So South Efford Marsh is about 4 miles inland from Bigbury. So this is before we had the site. So we acquired the site in 2011. This is from 2008. Originally the site, this whole area here, was actually just part. This is the River Avon, and this was all just part of the estuary. But in 1760, the land was reclaimed and a seawall was built around here, and it was drained and turned into pasture. So turned it back into farmland, and these drainage ditches here were put in. In 1943, there was a stray bomb dropped just about here during the Second World War, and it breached the wall and did allow some seawater to come in, and we did start to get some salt marsh communities developing in this area. But then the wall was repaired in 1956, and then there was some area of salt marsh here, but mostly it was sort of semi-improved, very improved grassland really, and not very species rich. So in 2011, the Environment Agency, and in line with the EU directive, wanted to increase the amount of salt marsh habitat. So salt marsh is a very rare habitat actually, worldwide and in the UK, and it's been lost due to land reclamation such as this, roads, town developments on the coast, and also rising sea levels, because if the sea level rises, basically the salt marsh has nowhere to go. Normally it would just carry on developing further inland. So the idea was to build, to basically create salt marsh habitat in this area here. And in 2011, they put in a self-regulating tide gate just at this spot here. So here's some pictures of the gate being put in. So it's basically, it was a 1 metre diameter pipe that's put underneath the bank, and it's on this cradle. So as the tide comes in, this cradle moves around, the float goes up, and this cradle moves, and then opens the aperture, and then the tide goes in here and then into the reserve. And then as the tide gets higher, that moves up, and then it closes it off. So at high tide, basically no more water can get in, and then the water drains back out as the tide recedes. There's a flap here, and it drains back off the reserve. So the reason the tidal gate was put in was so that it acted as a sort of flood defence rather than just creating a big gap and just allowing the tide to come in naturally. So this was what happened a few months after flooding. You can see already that a lot of the mud is developing here. These little creeks started developing, so the water's coming in here, and then seawater then's coming in, and it's also killing off some of the grasses and soft rush that can't cope with the tidal inundation. And this is a picture, so I don't have an aerial picture from 2019, but this is just a picture from the other end of the site, and you can see by 2019 that we're getting a lot of water coming onto the site. It looks very different. And these are some of the plants that have come in. So this is glasswort. This is a pioneer species, so this can cope with a lot of inundation of seawater. So this can cope with being inundated on every single tide. So it's called the sort of pioneer salt marsh plant. And then higher up, these sort of plants, sea aster and sea sparrow, and other plants like sea purslane that can't cope with such a inundation, are sort of higher up, away from the. So you've got the mudflat. There's pioneer plants, and then further inland, essentially, you have these other plants coming in. So whether it's worked as developing a salt marsh yet is debatable. I think that could take a much longer time. But what is clear is it has become a fantastic site for birds. And we're often getting more birds now on the nature reserve than on the adjacent estuary, partly because there's less disturbance. So I'm by no means a birder, but I'll just briefly go through a few of the birds that I've seen. So obviously lots of little egrets. There's a heronry over near Big Brew, about 4 miles away, so they breed there, but they're pretty much resident at South Efford Marsh. Other common species, grey heron, grey wagtail. So these species don't nest on the site, but they're often here. You often see them. Kingfisher again breeds off the site further up the river, but you inevitably see one flying up and down the ditches. Shelduck breed in the rabbit burrows in the fields just above the marsh, but they'll be seen regularly coming down and feeding on the mud here. So other birds that you'd see, passage migrants, so mostly just sort of passing through. So black-tailed godwits, again, although now we're starting to see black-tailed godwits staying over for the whole winter rather than just passing through. Ospreys regularly spend a couple of weeks at South Efford Marsh feeding. I've yet to see it actually. Every time we come down, our local volunteer tells me that the osprey's around, and I seem to always miss it. So hopefully one day. Some other winter visitors. So we get large flocks of widgeon until up to sort of 200 birds regularly seen. Redshank, lapwings. Some fantastic photographs here by various different people. Jeff Fole, Kevin McDonough, who's one of our Wednesday group volunteers. And then we get some rarities. We had a glossy ibis on site it seemed to be there for quite a few years actually. I haven't seen it for a while. But also spoonbill. So here's a lovely photograph. Seems to have made friends with the grey heron. Again, they're related to the ibis, and that's been seen. Hasn't been seen for a while, but it was at South Efford Marsh for quite a long time. We've also had a lesser yellowlegs still at South Efford Marsh. It's been there for quite a few months now. I've had quite a few birders come down to see that. So we've got quite a lot of breeding birds on site. So we've got some nice banks with lots of gorse on the edges, and cell buntings. We've got 3 or 4 pairs now nesting on the site. So the nearest populations are Poole Point and Labrador Bay near Teignmouth. But yeah, so it's great to get cell buntings nesting on site now. We also get 3 or 4 pairs of reed buntings nesting along the edge of the ditches. Another species that so we've got these banks along the edge of the marsh, and they're actually surprisingly species rich. And a few years ago, one of our Wednesday group volunteers, Chris Hughes, found some harvest mouse nests, which was fantastic. So they make 2 types of nests. They have a breeding nest, which is about the size of a tennis ball, similar to a dormouse nest in size. And they also have day nests that are the size of ping pong balls, but they need this sort of long grass habitat here. But that was great to find harvest mice along the banks as well. Lots of invertebrates, peacock butterfly. This is female wasp spider, an angle-shaped moth. This picture was taken on a Devon moth group trapping session a couple of years ago. And this picture was actually taken at night, and it's feeding on Spartina that's been infected with a fungus called ergot, and the fungus causes the plant to exude sap and sugars. And this plant was absolutely covered in these moths all feeding from it, and also lots of earwigs. It was unfortunately I didn't get a picture of the whole plant, but it was a pretty spectacular sight actually. Again, lots of well, not lots of otters, but we get otters regularly using the site, and we've got these runs. So they come off the estuary and they feed on the mullet and the crab and the small fish in the ditches. You regularly see spraying there. So once again, I'm very grateful to Lily Wheeler Legacy, that again provided well, money for my time to supervise sort of volunteer groups to come out. Again, Devon and Dartmoor volunteer groups spent a lot of time at South Efford Marsh. And this is Eric, who's our sort of volunteer warden for the site. So here we're trying to stop this water flowing off back into the ditch, so we're sort of blocking it up here to create some more freshwater pools. And at the bottom here is an awful lot of soft rush, where in areas away from the sea where the salt water isn't killing it off, although the soft rush is good and it creates a sort of extra habitat, it's started to dominate. So we do want to sort of cut some of it back. So we've had some volunteers out with brush cutters cutting back the rush here. And again, it paid for my time to help coordinate some of the conservation work on the banks. So I was just talking about the banks earlier, although again I've said that the gorse is fantastic habitat, and this is where the cell buntings and other bird species breed. But if we just left it, the gorse would just cover the whole bank. So we do have to cut back some of it each year, just small sections. And then what we end up with is a mosaic of gorse, brambles, and the grassy areas, which again are where the harvest mice live. And we also get glowworms and other insects. This is a painted lady butterfly and other black knapweed. So it's creating this mosaic. This is the marsh here, and this is grazed with Dexter cattle in the summer. But these banks here aren't grazed, so we do have to come in and sort of cut these bits back and do a bit of management work. And then along the edges of the path and the ditch, we put in this willow hedge. So some of this willow was taken from the site, and some of it was actually taken from Andrews Wood. We planted this in 2014 to create a screen along the edge of the ditch. Basically, you just cut, as you probably know, you can just cut willow and just stick it in the ground, and it grows. It's amazing. But this was it in 4 years later, and we want to keep it as a thick willow screen. So we did some sort of hedge laying, hedge willow weaving, cross between the two. and to create this willow screen. So this is various volunteers from the South Devon and Dartmoor group as well. So there was quite a lot of this to do. And where you get the thick willow screen, it's great for birds as well. They don't necessarily nest in it, but they'll feed in it because it attracts lots of invertebrates. We get sort of dunnocks and stone chats and other birds coming in there and flitting around and feeding. The Lily Wheeler project as well also paid for some nice new signs, and it paid for this bird ID sign. So we've got a bird hide on site already, but it paid for this nice new sign to go up in there. So again, it's about improving people's experience of being on the site, and hopefully sort of educating them as well about the sort of birds that they would see. So that's the end of my talk. So sorry, it's a bit of a very quick overview of some really lovely sites. But again, just to thank you for either for being members or making donations, or as you can see, contributions from legacies. Really has a massive makes a massive difference to our work. So thank you very much.
Hello everybody. Right, thank you, Jackie. That was a brilliant talk. I've been a supporter of the Wildlife Trust for over 20 years, and I still learn a massive amount, so thank you for that. I've had quite a few questions, so I don't think I'm going to get through all of them, but any that I miss, we'll try and answer in the email that we'll send out in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully, so no one will be disappointed. So Jackie, the very first question before your talk started was, are black redstarts common this year? Do you happen to know that?
No, I'm sorry. No, I really don't know. I'm not a birder at all. I think I've seen a black redstart this year. Yeah,
okay, well,
sorry.
That's all right. I can ask some of our colleagues, and I'll put that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
When's the best time to visit Andrews Wood, would you say?
It depends what you want to see. I mean, I think oh, sorry, what's going wrong? I mean, the grasslands are absolutely stunning. So I would say if you want to go and see the wildflowers, then really any time between sort of May and August is absolutely fantastic. The heath lobelia flowers about end of July, August, so a lot of people go down specifically to see them. But again, if you want to go and see a lovely bluebell wood, then go down in May. Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I would say that the summer is definitely the best time. I would say,
okay.
But yeah,
great. So you, I think, already answered the question that grazing happens at Andrews Wood, but do you also cut the grassland or use the seeds anywhere?
We have done in the past. We have done some. Simon Tommaso from North Devon has come down and done some seed collecting from some of the fields, and then it's been used elsewhere. I can't think offhand. I think Lynn Kensdine might have used some of the seeds on some of her landowners within the Avon project. So so we have used some of the seeds before. And done bits of cutting, so it's a mix. So we do that. We do sometimes cut some of the grass specifically around bits of heath lobelia to help the spread. So when it's just about to seed in about September time, while it's still just in flower and we can see it, we sometimes cut some of the vegetation around it to create bare ground, and then that allows the seed to spread into those areas, and then the ponies come and poach the ground up as well and help spread it. But so we do a little bit of cutting, but it's mostly the grazing really that helps to
Okay, great.
maintain the site.
And how long has Andrewswood been kind of agriculturally abandoned? Do you know?
Over 100 years. Yeah, I think it's about 120 years. I think that the sort of the farmhouse was abandoned. It was abandoned gradually, so the woodland is at different ages according to when it got abandoned. So our oldest trees are 100 years old, and some of the and obviously the trees on the hedge bank are much older because they were there when it was agricultural land. But some of the younger bits really sort of just grown up over sort of 40-50 years ago. And obviously the bits of grassland we have were the bits that just for some reason stayed open and got grazed still, never really reverted back to woodland. It wants to revert back to woodland constantly, having to sort of clear the saplings and manage it. So it's a little bit artificial, but the grassland habitat is so rare in that area that we have to sort of manage it to a certain extent and stop it all going back to woodland.
Yeah, okay. And is the John Spry Pond puddled? Hopefully you'll know what that means.
No, it wasn't. No, the ground, the soil there is quite clay. And we found with some of the other ponds that we dug out, and if you let the ponies actually go into the pond, they actually puddle it themselves. So puddling is just basically sealing the clay soil so that it retains the water. So yes, for some ponds you might bring in clay and you line it with clay, and then you press it all down to seal it. But at Andrewswood we've never had to do that. It sort of does. I mean, it naturally sort of puddles itself. And again, if we let the ponies, because it's not fenced off there, the ponies will wander around in it as well, and their hooves help to seal it.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you. So there's been a couple of questions kind of to do with lockdowns and COVID. Assuming that people have been using the nature reserves more during lockdown to take their exercise.
Yeah.
Firstly, have you seen that happening, and have there been any negative impacts from too many visitors?
Not, I wouldn't say particularly at those reserves that I've just talked about. I think it's been more local people using the sites. Obviously you can't drive too far, so people are using their local sites to walk the dogs. I wouldn't say any of the sites I've talked about, I wouldn't say there's certainly not been a negative impact. I don't think, not that I know of. But some of the other sites, some of our other sites, maybe Bovey Heathfield, for instance, near Bovey Tracy, we've had a lot more dog walkers and things, which have maybe has had a negative impact. Yeah.
I mean, it's nice that your reserves, haven't been negatively impacted, but local people have been able to use them.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, local people might think otherwise that I don't, but Ladyswood does get a lot of use by dog walkers as well. But we're trying to implement dogs on leads policies, but it's very difficult you can't be there to warden the sites all the time.
Okay. So I think we've got time for just another couple of quick questions. So do you see salmon and sea trout at New England Wood?
I'm sure at certain times of year you would see them coming out. I haven't been there to see them, but I think it's August time. Maybe they come up and lay their eggs.
Great, okay. And do you know what the water quality is like on the river that runs through there? Is it kind of quite good, or?
I think it is. there were some surveys done by Viridor. So when before we got the site in 2009, Viridor had to do some impact assessments for when this road was potentially going to go through it. And as part of that, they had to do lots of surveys of the rivers and all the wildlife, and it was good quality then. I mean, the fact that you've got fish spawning there and there are lots of invertebrates means it is good quality, but it is prone to pollution. So we had an incident a few months ago, and the whole river went completely white, and it was from there was a quarry just up the road, not the quarry next door. That it was a spillage from the quarry, and the whole river went white for a couple of hours. And we're still sort of investigating how that happened and what impacts that might have. And we occasionally get rubbish coming into the site from into the streams there we've had to clear, but I think generally it's pretty good quality, I think. Yeah, still.
And finally, do you have a favourite species on any of the reserves? Have you got something that you particularly like? Favourite
species? I'm very fond of dormice. I do some of the dormouse surveys, Andrews Wood. Yes, probably dormice. Yeah, it doesn't matter how often I see them. I still think they're just lovely.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you everyone for coming. If you have any questions regarding making a will or how to leave a gift in your will to charity, then do please contact me. Hope you've enjoyed the evening. Like I say, we will send an email out, hopefully with some answers to a couple of the questions that we couldn't get through today. Thank you for joining us, and good evening. Bye.
Bye.